G'day, Pastor Blake here. Thanks so much for watching this message today. I pray that this sermon and resource would help grow you in your relationship with Jesus, also in conjunction with a local church. If you have any questions about our church, you can head to our website, devonportcoc.com.au. Again, thanks for watching this message today, and I do hope that it blesses you in your love and devotion towards Jesus Christ. Well, once upon a time, the monks at a remote monastery deep in the woods followed this very rigid vow of silence. Their vow could only be broken once a year on Christmas, and this vow of silence could be only broken at Christmas by only one monk. And that monk could speak for only one sentence. Well, one Christmas, Brother Thomas had his turn to speak, and he said, "I love the delightful mashed potatoes that we have every year with the Christmas roast." And then he sat down and silence ensued for 365 days. The next Christmas, Brother Michael got his turn and said, "I think the mashed potatoes are lumpy and I truly despise them." Once again, silence ensued for 365 days. The following Christmas, Brother Paul rose and said, "I am fed up with this constant bickering." Yes. Even the monks. Relational conflict. Relational conflict is not something that should surprise us as Christians. It shouldn't surprise us as human beings. Conflict is inevitable in life. Raise your hand here today if you've never had a conflict in your life. Yeah, said nobody, right? Conflict is inevitable in life. We see it everywhere. In fact, our lives are shaped by conflict. Conflict is inevitable at the home, in the home. We fight with our families. We have disagreements with our families and friends. Conflict is inevitable in the workplace. We struggle to get along sometimes. Maybe you've struggled to get along with difficult co-workers in your past, in your life. Conflict is also sometimes inevitable in the church. Who's been part of a church where there's been conflict? Yeah? Even in this church, right? So conflict is inevitable even in the church, and we feel the strain of division and disagreement in our churches from time to time. And there are people who might enjoy conflict too much, which is a bit sick, I think, or we might avoid it altogether. There are people, maybe you're someone here today, if there's relational conflict in your life, you just want to run away from it, ignore it altogether in your life. But here's the thing, and this is a series that we're starting called Confronting Conflict over the next 3 weeks, and that we all need to learn to confront conflict in our lives. We need to learn more faithful biblical ways of addressing the inevitable conflict that we have in our lives. And so over the next 3 weeks, we're going to look at 3 areas. We're going to look at today conflict in the home. Next week, Yowie's going to preach on confronting conflict in the workplace. And then I'm going to wrap the series up, I think, on the 3rd week on confronting conflict in the church. And so this is a series that I think is going to be very practical and very helpful for all of us, because we all experience conflict in our lives, and we're going to look and give you some tools and resources for seeking reconciliation and wholeness in our relationship. And the question is not whether conflicts will come, but how will we handle them when they come? Because here's the thing, we have to prepare for conflict. We have to be prepared for conflict. Here's what I know, because nobody taught you how to deal with conflict. If you're anything like me, your parents didn't teach you. Your parents didn't teach you how to handle conflict. School didn't teach you how to handle conflict. Most of us have never been shown how, in a mature way, to deal with conflict. And so maybe you are someone here who was blessed in your family of origin that was modelled to you how to handle conflict. But I'm going to go out there on a limb and say for most of us, our parents never showed us how to deal with conflict in a healthy way. So the question is not whether conflicts will come, but how will we handle them? Conflicts in families is one of the oldest in the book. You go into Genesis and you can see conflict right throughout the book of Genesis. You know, there was conflict and murder with Cain and Abel, wasn't there? There are hundreds of reasons why families fight and experience conflict. Whether it's conflict between a husband and wife, parents and children, sibling wars, discipline, curfews, in-laws, unmet expectations, addiction or money. Not understanding spouse's family of origin. The list is endless. Why is it that some of the worst conflicts we experience in life is between the people that we love the most? God has an ideal for our families that would be defined by love, honour and respect. And we need to pursue the ideal even though that we may fall short often. But the ideal, however, is worthy of our pursuit. Andy Stanley says this: in a family, when you win an argument, everyone loses. In a family, when you win an argument, everyone loses. You may win an argument in a courtroom. You may win an argument in a boardroom. But you don't win anything in a living room. Nobody wins in family conflict. And there are a number of ways in which we can handle conflict in an unhealthy or healthy way, different ways that have often been modelled to us by our family of origin. Now, I want you to maybe think as a kid, how did your parents resolve conflict? That can be a little challenging, can't it? Some might say, oh, it was Dad just bottled it up. Some might say, oh, Dad threw something through the window. How did Mum deal with conflict? Interesting, but our family of origin sort of teaches us unhealthy things. Maybe you can identify yourself in one of these. You can yell that out. Don't yell this out. Don't identify anyone or your wife or anything like that. Please don't do that here. Maybe do that at home. But the first one, but there is the peacekeeper. There is the peacekeeper. There is a difference. That should actually say peacekeeper, not peacemaker. But there is a peacekeeper. There is a difference between peacekeeping and peacemaking. Peacekeeping is when there are people who try to keep the peace at all costs. Keep the peace at all costs, They avoid conflict. Whatever you do, don't tell your father. Whatever you do, don't tell Mum. Let's not rock the boat. Avoid conflict. Put it under the carpet. Even Christian leaders can do this. Put it under the carpet. Don't face it. Avoid conflict at all costs. Peacemaking, though, is where a person recognises the issue and wants to discuss it, and they are assertive, and they take the initiative to solve this problem. Do you know what? The peace has been unsettled in our relationship, so let's sort it out. Let's have an honest and difficult conversation so that we can restore the peace. Then there's the sulker, the person who pouts in conflict, does the silent treatment and withdraws affection. Then there is the stuffer, who is not denying the conflict. They feel it, but they stuff it down, and they stuff it down, and they stuff it down until it erupts like Krakatoa, an explosion of anger. And then there is the litigator, who looks at everything in a very rational way and then makes their case and goes to the person or family member like they feel like they're in a courtroom. And litigators are good at winning the argument. They win, but at the expense of other people's feelings. And finally, there is the screamer. People scream at each other and get it out of their system, and then they move on. But the screamer just leaves like a devastating tsunami in their wake, a devastating of words and pain and said things that they wish that they could take back. The screamer. So there are different ways for people to deal with conflict in their family, and we get consumed by these things, and we miss the one common cause. And that there is a primary source of every single conflict that you will ever experience in your life, whether it's in the home, workplace, or church. And the question is, what causes fights and quarrels among you? That's a great question. It's a question that James also asked in James chapter 4. If I asked that question, honestly, in my family, all my kids would say, "You do, Dad. You do, Dad." We probably all would answer, "You. You do." We pretend that all conflict comes from outside. The conflict comes from the jerks at school. The conflict comes from my unforgiving boss. The conflict comes from my nasty neighbour. The conflict all comes from out there. The problems are out there. The problems are external. The problems are out there, but in fact, James says, no, it comes from within yourself. Obviously, I'm not referring to marital abuse or anything like that. That's a different thing, right? But ultimately, most conflicts that we experience we think it's out there, but James is saying, hey, what causes fights and quarrels among you? You know, we are always pointing the finger. But time out, it comes from within you a lot of the times. And we say that you're the problem, not me. And so what causes fights and quarrels among them? No, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? The reason that we sometimes can't stop fighting or having conflicts is because we don't understand the issues most times are not from outside of you, but from within you. It's always related to some unfulfilled desire in your heart. And I just want to say to you this morning that nobody ever causes your feelings. I'm going to say that again. Nobody ever causes your feelings. You are responsible for your feelings. We interpret an event or conflict, and that event will produce feelings that are either positive feelings or negative feelings, but we have an emotion that makes us feel bad, and then we have a verbal vomit over people, and it's on like Donkey Kong. We have these unfulfilled desires and unfulfilled expectations in a relationship that spill out onto other people and our families that result in conflict. But James is saying but originally started in me. You desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. See, here's the first thing we need to understand. Every conflict begins when you don't get something from someone else. Every conflict begins when you or I don't get something from someone else. Conflict arises from this unfulfilled desire or unmet need within us at times. And James is using hyperbole here, which just means exaggerating the point. Using this hyperbole, he makes a point. He's not talking about literal murder, but he's saying that there are some things that you want so bad that you are willing to hurt someone else to get them. You want this so bad that I am willing to hurt you to get it. Whether it's through words or actions, for people to act a certain way that you want, you are willing to destroy the relationship to get it. Whether it's parents destroying their relationship with their kids because they want them to act a certain way, or they want them to live a certain way, be a certain type of person. We want them to, maybe we have expectations as parents, we want them to work at a specific job or go to a particular university, because at the back of that are parents who value success, money and career more than they do allowing their kids to do what they want to do in life. We want them to conform and do what we want them to do. I can see many times that I've been guilty of that as a parent. There has been unfulfilled desire in the parent, and they start pushing and pushing and pushing until the child runs away from them, either literally or emotionally. Why does the child run away? For the exact same reason that the parents pushed. Because the child is not getting something he or she wants. Husbands try to get their wives to act a certain way. Good luck with that. Wives try and get their husbands to act a certain way. And the first thing to realise to deal with conflict in the family is to realise you want something but you don't get it. You kill and covet, but you cannot have what you want. And we have to recognise that the conflict often, I'm not saying 100%, but often the conflict arises from what's going on within me or within you. And we have to own it, but we don't, so there's conflict. I mean, if I admit that the conflict is really originating in me, then you know what? I may lose leverage and it will weaken my case in the argument. And I'll lose the argument. And James says good. In the words of my wife, who I will quote today, because she is often right and I am often wrong. Do you want to be right or do you want to keep relationship? Do you want to be right or do you want to keep the relationship? I've failed at this many times. What is Alison saying? Do you want to win the argument or do you want to still be in good relationship with the kids? I'll give you an example as it blows and rains. Turning the lights off at home. Now, I like the lights to be turned off and not left on all day when nobody is home. Is there anyone who can relate to this? Is there anyone who can relate to my pain? All right, okay. So I know my kids hate me reminding them about this. Why do I ask it? Because in my family of origin, my dad always said to turn the lights off. And I realised the reason because we grew up during the recession that we had to have. And, you know, Dad was retrenched from the pit, the mine and stuff. And so, you know, you're just a product of your family of origin at times. And I also see it as good stewardship. My dad was always watching the electricity bills. Now, that even plays out here in the church because I can't stand it. We changed all the lights in the toilets to sensor lights because there are people in our church who know how to turn a light switch on but don't know how to turn it off. And so I thought, we're going to take care of this. We'll put all sensor lights, and Grace put all sensor lights through all the toilets so they go off after 15 minutes, and I'm happy. Now, people might say that's a bit sick, but no, I think it's a stewardship thing as well. Because there have been times when I come down to church and the church have been on for 24, 48 hours, the lights have been on. You know, can anyone feel my pain? Does anyone agree with me here, yeah? Yeah, okay, there you go. I'm trying to be a good steward, but there's another side to that. There's a shadow side to that. However, my wise daughter, Ruby, sent me this TikTok video. I don't know if you know what TikTok is. It's a social media thing. I don't have it. That sort of proves Alison's point. The dialogue's a bit quick, but if you miss it, I'll explain it. Let's just watch this.
Well, you left your light on in your room again. You act like you paid the electric bill around here or something.
Well, actually, I will, because I read online whenever you leave your light on for 24 hours, it only costs 5 cents a day. Here's your nickel.
He's actually right. So we're going to ruin a relationship over 5 cents a day. And plus, Home Depot, they sell motion sensors and timer switches for like 20 and 25 bucks. So how about quit ruining relationships over 5 cents a day? Go buy one of those and quit worrying about it. Do better.
If you missed it, the father comes out and says, hey, I told you to turn the light off. And he goes, yeah, and he says, well, you know what? Do you pay for stuff around here? And he says, well, in fact, I do. I read online that if you leave the light on, blah, blah, it only costs 5 cents a day, whatever. And he said, the dad says, you know what? Hey, hang on. Do you want to be right or do you want to keep relationship? What's the most important thing there? And I think there's a lot of, I still turn the lights off, but, you know, and well, electricity's going up, isn't it? But the reality is, do you want to be right? It's right to turn the lights off. But do I want to be right or do I want to be in the right relationship? Am I making sense? Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? But if everybody in a family realised that the quarrels often come from within them also, and if all the family put relationship before being right, then the temperature, I think, would come down and we could avoid a lot of unnecessary conflict. I think we also need to stop focusing on the work that other people need to do in our family and start focusing on the work that I need to do. We're very good at telling others in families, you need to do this, you need to do this, wife, you need to do this, husband, you need to do this. But I think what we need to start doing is start focusing on the work that I've got to do within myself. What causes quarrels and fights among you? Doesn't it originate from the battle that's raging within you? But it's a lot harder. You know, it's easier to say to someone else, hey, you need to change. Man, you need to get therapy. Or you need to do this. But it's a lot harder to say, I've got a whole lot of work to do within myself. James chapter 4, 2-3 says, you do not have because you do not ask God, and when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. And later on in this chapter, he talks about wisdom. If you lack wisdom, go to God and ask for wisdom. But I think the point here, before you start a fight, go to God. These verses are not saying that God is Santa Claus and he'll give you anything that you want anytime. It's not saying that. But James is saying that before you go and start a fight and verbal vomit over somebody, that before you go and start a fight, hey, first check in with God in prayer and take the person in situation who is not giving you what you want to God in prayer. Take the unfulfilled desire to God first. And if you do this, there are 3 things that just might happen. Number 1, these are 3 things that you might realise. That you are asking for something that they are not capable of giving you. Maybe they're just not in an emotional place to be able to do that. Maybe they are not in a mature place to be able to do that. And I'm asking something here. Maybe they need some skills. Maybe they need to get some new skills. Maybe they don't understand from family of origin. Maybe they haven't got the skills that they needed before they went into the marriage relationship. Maybe they are still living a single life, but they're a couple. You are asking for something that they're not capable of giving you. Number 2, you may realise that you're asking them the wrong thing. Where you actually take it to God in prayer, and you realise, man, I'm asking them the wrong thing because of wrong motives that are in me. James says, usually selfish motives. And so that, the first thing, it's usually selfishness. It's selfishness that causes conflict, because the selfishness motives is within us. And if you have one person who's selfish, another person is selfish, and I want this and I want that, I want. And the other thing is pride, If you want to be right, or you want the relationship, that's a pride issue. You may realise that we're asking him the wrong thing. Someone once said that there is no such thing as married problems. There are only single problems that people bring into a marriage. And doing marriage counselling and pre-marriage counselling over many years now, I see that. A lot of the problems that happen in young marriage, in the first years of married life, is that not understanding, hey man, if you're a single guy, man, you were a single guy. You're not a single guy anymore. You need to start acting like a married man. And so once you've taken the issue to God in prayer and you have filtered out maybe any selfish desires and issues within yourself that are yours and nobody else's, if there's anything left after that, what would you do? Well, then you'd pray for love and wisdom before you go and speak to that person. And sometimes painful and hard conversations need to be had. You hurt me, but I love you. Let's work it out. Reconciliation is much more likely like that way. And a final way to deal with conflict in the family at home is, I think, in Colossians chapter 3, 12 to 14. It says, therefore, as God's chosen people, let's be honest here. Does this describe your family? Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. And if any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Paul is saying we need to put on some new clothes. In her book, Wearing God, church historian and priest Lauren Winner describes various tangible metaphors that Scripture uses for speaking about God. She has this chapter on clothing that illustrates that there are many places in the Bible where the Bible speaks about the power of the clothes that we wear. She describes the way her personal clothing choices often feels like selecting an identity, like the professional outfits that command respect, the vintage clothes that display a hip persona, or the shapeless black dresses and sweaters that communicate something closer to the truth, or an absent-minded professor throwing on whatever works in between writing and teaching. And then she says, the way clothing shapes one's sense of self and shows something to others comes home to me when I walk into my church for the funeral of a long-time member and see 3 bereaved daughters and their own daughters all clad in elegant black. She notes that in an earlier time, the women would have worn black for months, and their sons or brothers would have worn black armbands for months. Their clothing would identify them as mourners, as people who have the experience and identity of mourning. It would have shaped the way that they navigated the world during their mourning, the way people responded to them, their own sense of self as they left their homes in these specific garments. And Paul is saying something similar then when he instructs the Colossian church and us today to put on these clothes of compassion, compassionate hearts, of patience and meekness and humility in our families. He is saying these things are the garments. These things of compassion and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience, bearing with each other and forgiving one another, that these these things are the garments that identify you as God's chosen, holy, and beloved people. How are we doing with that in our family conflict? Does that describe what we wear, the clothes that we wear in our families' lives and conflict? Like, do we wear God? Are there some people here today that need to put on some new clothes as you go home in your marriages and in your families and your relationship with your children? Some new clothes, the clothes of Christ, and wear them home today with you. I just want to close with this question. Who in your family is suffering because you are not getting your own way? Who in your family is suffering because you are not getting your own way? Because I know in my own life that I have to resist the temptation because I'm selfish in the heart. I'm selfish at times, and I have to resist the temptation to react and verbal somebody, to pause long enough so I can identify what are the unmet desires within me. What are they? What are the unmet desires in you that you can take to God to work on it from here? I think some of us need to do that today. Like, Lord, what's up? What's going on here in this conflict that I'm involved in? Is it legit? Like, what's actually happening here? Or is this more of a reflection of what's going on in me? You see, I got to tell you something, that if there is unresolved conflict, if I have unresolved conflict, it blocks my relationship with God. You cannot be right with God and be wrong with other people. I'll say that again. You cannot be right with God and be wrong with other people. You cannot be out of kilter with other people and in conflict and think that you're right with God. In fact, the Bible says that if you are in conflict with somebody, God will not hear your prayers. He will not hear your prayers. See, there's this vertical between us and God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul and all your mind, and love others as you love yourself. If the horizontal is out of whack, then the vertical will be no good as well. You can't say I'm in right relationship with God and hate my brother. You can't be in right relationship with God and despise someone in the church. You can't be in right relationship with God and, have unresolved forgiveness in your heart. You are, if let's be honest, if that is you or me here today, we are kidding ourselves. We are living a discipleship that is an illusion. Hello? And I'll talk about this more in the church week. The Bible says this. He says, if you're out of whack with someone in the church, or you're out of whack with someone in your family, there have been plenty of times when I've had an argument with Alison, I've had to come and preach. And it's hard. I'm just being honest. How many times have you had a blue on the way to church with your spouse? You probably have. Or someone close to you. But the Bible actually says this, that if you're out of whack with someone, your wife or husband or family, it's better to stay in the car park and work it out and miss worship than hear me preach. That's the truth. Unresolved conflict blocks my relationship with God. Do you know that conflict is not something to ignore or avoid, but I believe, church, it is an opportunity for the triumph of grace. Don't run away from conflict. Conflict's inevitable. But I believe that if we take on these principles and we have the attitude that Paul wrote to the church in the Colossian church, and when we have that, I think that, and when we are willing to be honest about what's going on within us, what unmet needs and expectations is in my heart here, then I do think it's an opportunity for the grace of God to triumph.